I didn't cry. I didn't slam a door. I didn't even sit down. I just stood there in my hotel room in San Sebastian, 12,000 miles from home, watching my brother swing a sledgehammer through the south wall of my Vineyard's tasting barn on a live Instagram feed. And I said to myself, out loud in the dark, okay, keep going. That was the moment I knew I wasn't going to stop him. Not yet. Not until he dug himself so deep that no one, not our parents, not his wife, not the Regional Planning Commission, could pull him back out. My name is Whitney. I'm 31, an environmental attorney by training, though I haven't practiced full-time in almost 6 years. 6 years ago, I bought a 112-acre stretch of failing dry pasture in the eastern foothills of Sonoma County, California, using the inheritance my grandmother left me and a private loan from a college friend who believed in me when nobody in my family did. I turned that land into a working organic vineyard. Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, and a small block of Grenache on the south slope. I named it after my grandmother, Marin Hill, because she was the only person in my family who ever looked at me and said, "You don't have to keep paying for them, you know." She died the year I broke ground. I think about her every single morning when I walk the rows. My younger brother, let's call him my brother, because that's all he is to me now, is named Holt. He's 2 years younger, 6'2", and has spent his entire adult life being told he is destined for something bigger than the rest of us. He went to a private business school our parents could not actually afford, dropped out his junior year to start a lifestyle brand that sold protein bars at music festivals, lost about $90,000 of our parents' retirement money in the process, and was, by the time I'm telling you about, on his 4th or 5th concept. This one was a luxury wellness resort, salt caves, cold plunges, $40,000 weddings on a vineyard. The vineyard in his pitch deck was mine. He hadn't asked me, he had simply assumed. Let me back up. I have to back up, or none of the rest of it will make sense. I grew up in a house where I was the responsible one before I was old enough to spell the word. My father is a charming man with a soft handshake who has never held a job longer than 3 years. My mother is a former dental hygienist who quit working in 1998 to focus on the family and never went back. The family she focused on, mainly, was Holt. By the time I was 16, I was working 2 jobs to cover my own car insurance, my own SAT prep, my own braces. By the time I was 22 and graduating from UC Davis, I had co-signed on a used Audi for my brother that he totaled 3 months later. By the time I was 26, I had loaned my parents. I am using the word loaned very generously here, somewhere north of $41,000 to keep the house afloat, while Holt's protein bar company found its footing. I never saw a dime of it back. I stopped expecting to. My grandmother saw all of this. She watched it for years from her little house in Petaluma. And when she died, she did something nobody in the family expected. She left her entire estate, the house, the land it sat on, 2 CDs at Wells Fargo, and a small portfolio of conservative mutual funds. To me. Specifically to me. Not to my parents. Not to be shared with the family. To me with a letter in her own handwriting that said, in part, you have spent your life feeding people who do not feed you back, and I would like to give you a chance to feed yourself. My mother didn't speak to me for 4 months after the will was read. My father tried to convince me, gently at first, and then less gently, that the right thing to do was sell everything and split it 3 ways. When I said no, he stopped calling. When I bought the Marin Hill parcel 6 months later, with most of the proceeds, my mother called me selfish on a voicemail I still have saved on my phone. I keep it for the same reason some people keep a scar visible. Not to feel sorry for myself. To remember the shape of the cut. Holt didn't say anything during any of this, he just watched. And I'm certain actually, that he started planning then. Now, the vineyard. The first 3 years almost killed me. I won't pretend they didn't. I was learning soil chemistry by reading textbooks at 2 a.m. I was driving a tractor I'd bought at auction for $9,000 and rebuilt myself in a barn that didn't have a roof yet. I made every mistake a first-generation grower can make. I planted the wrong rootstock in one block and had to tear it out the second spring. I lost half my Grenache yield in year 3 to a late frost because I'd been too cheap to install wind machines. But I learned. And by year 5, last year, Marin Hill produced its first commercial vintage, 1,800 cases. The Cab Franc got a 91 from a regional reviewer that matters in our county. I had a wine club with 340 members and a tasting barn we built ourselves out of reclaimed redwood from a torn-down dairy in Tamales Bay. The barn was the heart of it. My grandmother's recipe cards, she'd been a baker before she was anything else, were framed on the wall behind the bar. My foreman, a woman named Rocio, who'd been with me since the second year, ran the harvest crew. My assistant, a girl from Heltzberg named Pia, who started as an intern and stayed, ran the tasting room. I had the most important thing my family had ever wanted to give Holt, and never could. I had built something that was mine. In late September of last year, I flew to Spain. I'd been invited to a 2-week intensive on Old World blending technique in San Sebastian, hosted by a Rioja producer I'd been reading about for years. It was the first real trip I'd taken since I'd bought the land. Rocio had the harvest crew under control. P had the tasting room. I left on a Tuesday. I planned to be back the Sunday after next. On the Friday of my first week, I got a text from my mother that said simply, "When you get a chance, honey, we should talk about the resort plans." I read it 3 times in a tapas bar, with my phone shaking in my hand. I called her. She didn't pick up. I called my father. He didn't pick up. I called Holt. He picked up on the second ring, sounding like a man who's been waiting for the phone to ring for several days. "Hey sis," he said. The voice was so warm it made my skin crawl. "Mom said she texted you. So look, I don't want this to be weird. We're family. But we've been talking, the 3 of us, and the truth is, the property's just sitting there. It's underutilized. You're doing your little wine thing, which is great. That's great. But the highest and best use of that parcel is hospitality. I've got investors. I've got a concept deck. I've got a path. I just need the land." I said, "The land is mine, Holt." He said, "Right, technically. But Mom and Dad and I have been talking about how Grandma's intent was always for everybody." I said nothing. He took my silence for hesitation, which was the first mistake of his life that was going to cost him. He said, "Look, I'm doing this whether you're in or out. Mom and Dad are co-signing the construction loan. We've already had a site visit. The bulldozers are scheduled for the 18th. You can either sign a long-term lease back to us for the tasting barn. We'll let you keep doing your wine thing in a corner of the property. You can be like the rustic accent, or you can step aside. Up to you. But the resort is happening. The Marin Hill brand is mine now. I had it trademarked last month. I want to be clear because some of you are going to ask. In that exact moment, I could have called my lawyer in Santa Rosa, filed an emergency injunction by Monday morning, had a sheriff on the property by Tuesday afternoon, and stopped the whole thing dead. I had every legal lever available to me. I had the deed. I had clean title. I had no liens. I had the trademark filing he was bragging about, which I knew because I had the actual trademark. Federally registered, sitting on file from 3 years earlier. His filing was a state application that hadn't even been processed yet. I could have ended it in 48 hours. I didn't. And I want to tell you why, because this is the part that some people in the comments are going to argue with. And I understand why. The reason wasn't pride. The reason wasn't drama. The reason was that I had tried, for 15 years, to stop my family from hurting me with reason, and with kindness, and with explanation, and with explanation, and with boundaries. And none of it had ever worked. They didn't respect language. They respected consequences, and the only consequence big enough to land was the one they built themselves. If I stopped Holt now, my mother would spend the next 10 years telling extended family that I'd crushed his dream. He would pivot to the next concept by Christmas. My parents would lend him more money they didn't have. And in 2 years, he'd come for the vineyard again, with a different angle, and we would be right back where we started. I needed him to commit the act all the way through. I needed the bulldozers on the ground. I needed his signature on the construction loan. I needed my parents' signatures on the personal guarantee. I needed the trees down and the trenches dug. I needed everyone, every single person who had spent 15 years feeding off me, to lock themselves into a position from which there was no graceful retreat. I said, "Okay, Holt." He said, "Wait, really?" I said, "I'm in Spain for another 9 days. Do what you have to do. We'll talk when I'm back." He laughed. He actually laughed. Then he hung up. I sat in that tapas bar for a long time. I ordered another glass of Tempranillo, and then I went back to my hotel, and I called 3 people, in this order: my attorney in Santa Rosa, the senior planner I knew at the Sonoma County Permit and Resource Management Department, and Rocio. To my attorney I said, "Do not file anything. Watch only. Document everything. Wait for my signal." To the senior planner I said, "I just want to confirm what I already know. Tell me again about the Williamson Act contract on Marin Hill." She told me. I wrote it down anyway. The entire parcel was enrolled in California's Land Conservation Act, what every grower in the state just calls Williamson. Under that contract, in exchange for property tax reductions I'd been collecting for 6 years, the land was restricted to agricultural use only. Commercial hospitality was explicitly prohibited. The contract had a 10-year rolling term. To get out of it, you had to file a notice of non-renewal and wait 9 years for it to wind down. Or you had to pay a cancellation fee equal to 12.5% of the unrestricted value of the land. For my parcel, in current dollars, that fee would be just over $400,000, payable to the county at the time of cancellation, and the cancellation had to be approved by the Board of Supervisors after a public hearing. There was no scenario in which Holt could legally operate a resort on that land. None. He could break ground. He could pour concrete. He could throw a grand. And the moment a single paying guest checked in, he would be in violation of a state contract with criminal penalties, civil penalties, and an automatic clawback of 6 years of back tax property assessments that I had legally received, but that the county would now demand from whoever held title. He didn't know any of this. He had never asked. He had Googled California Vineyard Resort and gotten excited. To Rocio, I said, do not stop them. Do not get hurt. Do not let the crew get hurt. Get everyone off the property the day they arrive. Lock up the equipment shed. Lock up the cellar. Walk away. Take video of everything from the road. You're on paid leave starting Monday. She said, Whitney, are you sure? I said, trust me, please. She trusted me. She always has. I stayed in Spain. I stayed in Spain while my brother and his investor, a man named Brock, who I will get to in a minute, showed up at Marin Hill on the 18th with 2 rented bulldozers, a backhoe, a contractor named Sully who had apparently been told this was a routine demo, and my parents in my mother's Lexus, smiling like they were about to cut a ribbon. I stayed in Spain while Rocio and Pia handed Holt the keys to the front gate, said nothing, and walked off the property. I stayed in Spain while Holt live-streamed himself in a brand new pair of Carhartts that still had the tag on the back pocket, swinging a sledgehammer through the south wall of the tasting barn, the wall behind which my grandmother's framed recipe cards had hung. The cards were in a safe deposit box in Santa Rosa. I'd moved them the week before I left. He didn't know that either. He swung that hammer like he was destroying my whole life, and what he was actually destroying was a wall. I watched the live stream from my hotel bed. He had 460 viewers. One of them was me, on a burner account. One of them was my attorney. One of them, I would later learn, was a junior staffer at the Sonoma County Department of Agriculture, who had been forwarded the link by a concerned neighbor. Holt's caption read, Out with the old. Marin Hill 2.0 is coming. Wellness, wine, weddings, the future of Sonoma hospitality. In the corner of the frame, you could see my mother on her phone, beaming. My father was holding a thermos. He looked, even through the pixelation, smaller than I remembered. The next 9 days are a blur to me now. I gave my full attention to the blending course because I had paid for it and because my grandmother did not raise me to waste opportunities for revenge. I learned more in those 9 days about Tempranillo than I had in 3 years of self-teaching. I came home tan and rested. I came home with a notebook full of harvest notes from Rioja that would change how I farm forever. I came home also to a property that looked like a war zone. The south wall of the tasting barn was gone. The redwood, my redwood, was in a debris pile near the equipment shed. 2 oak trees by the driveway, protected oaks listed on the county's heritage register, were down. Just down, lying on their sides. He had not pulled a single permit. He had not filed a single notice. He had bulldozed a strip of cover crop on the east-facing slope, which meant the soil was now exposed to October rain, which meant I was looking at the kind of erosion damage that takes 2 seasons to recover from. He had also, I noticed, posted a hand-painted sign at the gate that said Marin Hill Resort, coming spring. I drove past the property. I did not stop. I did not get out. I drove to my attorney's office in Santa Rosa, and we made phone calls for 6 hours. By the end of that day, the following things were either in motion or filed. A stop work order request to the county building department, a notice of unauthorized tree removal to the Heritage Tree Commission, a complaint to the Department of Conservation regarding the Williamson Act violation, an erosion control complaint to the Regional Water Quality Control Board, a federal trademark cease and desist to Holt and to his LLC, and a civil complaint for trespass, conversion, and waste, naming Holt, his investor Brock, my mother, my father, and the contractor Sully as defendants. I named everyone. Every single person who had set foot on that property with the intention of taking it from me. I did not call my parents. I did not call Holt. I did not warn anyone. And then I waited. It took 11 days. On day 5, the county building inspector showed up at the property unannounced and red-tagged the entire site. Holt called me, screaming. I let it go to voicemail. On day 7, the Heritage Tree Commission issued a notice of violation for the 2 oaks. The fine schedule for unpermitted removal of a heritage oak in Sonoma County, for those who don't know, is $25,000 per tree, plus replacement and monitoring costs over a 10-year period. 2 trees. $50,000 in fines alone. Holt called me 8 times. I let them all go to voicemail. On day 9, the Department of Conservation sent a formal notice of inquiry regarding the Williamson Act contract. They wanted to inspect the property. They wanted to interview the property owner. They wanted to know who had authorized commercial development on a parcel under agricultural preserve protection. My mother called me sobbing. I let it go to voicemail. On day 11, Brock, the investor, called me directly. He had gotten my number from my father. He did not scream. He spoke very quietly, the way people do when they have just realized they're in significant trouble. He said, "Whitney, I think there has been a misunderstanding. Your brother told me you were a co-owner. He told me you'd signed off. I wired $400,000 into an escrow account based on those representations. I need to understand what is happening here." I said, "Brock, I'm going to email you something." I emailed him the trademark registration, the deed, the Williamson Act contract, and a copy of the civil complaint that named him personally as a defendant. I CC'd my attorney. I added a one-line note that said, "I would strongly suggest you retain counsel and that your counsel speak to mine directly. We can discuss your potential exposure when that conversation happens." Brock retained counsel within the hour. Brock's counsel called my counsel within the day. By the end of that week, Brock had filed his own civil suit against Holt for fraud, for misrepresentation, for breach of fiduciary duty as a managing member of the LLC they had formed together. He wanted his $400,000 back. He wanted his $400,000 back. He wanted damages. He wanted his name off everything. This is the part that I want to slow down for, because this is the part the people in the comments who think I should have just called the cops the first day will never understand. If I'd called the cops the first day, Holt would have walked away with a citation. My parents would have helped him pay it. He would have cried to extended family that his sister had ruined his life over a misunderstanding. The narrative in our family would have been that I was cold, that I was unforgiving, that I had punished him for dreaming big. By waiting, I had let Holt commit, on camera, on live stream, in front of 460 witnesses, to taking permanent physical action on land that was provably mine, in violation of a state contract he didn't know existed, with my parents' signatures on a personal guarantee for a $400,000 construction loan from a private commercial lender on a project that could not legally exist. My parents had co-signed. I want you to understand what that means. My parents had co-signed with the family home, the house I grew up in, the house my grandmother lived next door to, the house my mother had refused to sell during every previous financial crisis, pledged as collateral on the personal guarantee. The construction loan was now in default. The lender, a small commercial outfit out of Walnut Creek, did not care about family dynamics. They cared about the collateral. I'm going to spare you the next 4 months because they were procedural and slow and full of the kind of meetings where everyone speaks in low voices. The short version is this. Holt's LLC was dissolved by court order. The fines from the Heritage Tree Commission and the Water Board came in at just under $90,000, assessed jointly and severally against Holt, my parents, and Sully the contractor. Brock got his $400,000 back from the escrow, but only after Holt personally guaranteed it, which he could not pay, which meant the lender came after my parents' house. My parents lost the house, not in a dramatic foreclosure auction, in a quiet short sale arranged by their attorney, 6 months after the Bulldozers arrived. They moved into a 2-bedroom rental in Ranert Park. My mother stopped posting on Facebook. My father took a part-time job at a hardware store, which is the longest he has held a job in 20 years. Holt filed for personal bankruptcy in May. He moved in with a friend in Reno. I never pressed the civil suit to trial. My attorney advised me that I had made my point and that pursuing further damages from a brother in bankruptcy and parents in a rental was, in her words, like trying to squeeze water from a stone you've already crushed. I agreed. I dropped the civil case. I did not drop the trademark action. I did not drop the Williamson Act complaint. Those were not about money. In November, almost a year after the Bulldozers, I held a quiet reopening at Marin Hill. We rebuilt the south wall of the tasting barn out of the same redwood, which I'd had Pia pull out of the debris pile and store. We replanted the 2 oaks, though they were saplings now and would not be heritage trees again in my lifetime. We hired a soil scientist to manage the erosion recovery on the east slope, which is going to take, the way she explained it, until about the year 2028. Rocio became my full vineyard manager, with a raise and an equity stake. Pia became my director of operations. I hired 3 new people. We released our second commercial vintage in December. The Petit Verdot got a 93. My mother sent me a letter in January. Handwritten. 6 pages. I read the first page. I put the rest in a drawer. I have not opened it again. I'm not angry exactly. I'm not anything exactly. I just don't have room in my life anymore for people who would only love me if I kept paying them to. I have my grandmother's recipe cards back on the wall behind the tasting bar. The frames are new. The redwood behind them is the same redwood my brother tried to break. Sometimes a guest will ask about them, and I'll tell them they were my grandmother's, and that she used to bake bread for the field workers during harvest at the place her father worked in Geyserville in the 40s. And they'll nod and take a sip of the Cap Franc and say something nice about the wine, and we'll move on. What I want to say to anyone watching this who recognizes some piece of their own family in mine is just this. You don't owe people the version of yourself they got used to using. You don't owe your parents the loan they never paid back. You don't owe your sibling the inheritance they didn't earn. You don't owe anybody an explanation for refusing to be drained anymore. And when somebody walks onto land you built with your own 2 hands and tells you that you were just a placeholder, you do not have to scream, and you do not have to fight, and you do not have to argue. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step aside, let them swing the hammer, and watch them build their own consequences. I poured a glass of the new Petit Verdot on the night the lender's notice came through on the house. I sat on the porch of the tasting barn. I looked out at the rose my grandmother never lived to see, and I drank to her. The wine was very good. The night was very quiet. And for the first time in my life, no one in my family was asking me for anything. It was, I think, the closest thing to peace I have ever known. I think about that night on the porch a lot, the glass of Petit Verdot, the quiet, the way nobody in my family was calling me for the first time in 15 years to ask for something. And what I've come to understand, sitting with it across a whole growing season, is that none of what happened to Holt or to my parents was something I did to them. It was something they walked into, one footstep at a time, while I stood out of the way and let them. That's the part I want anybody watching this to take with them. Cause and effect doesn't pause because you're family. When my brother swung that sledgehammer through my tasting barn wall, he wasn't striking me. He was setting in motion a chain, the Heritage Tree fines, the Williamson Act violation, Brock's wired $400,000, my parents' personal guarantee, that was already going to land where it landed. I didn't have to push, I just had to not catch them. For most of my life, I was a catcher. I caught my parents and they missed rent. I caught Holt when he totaled the Audi. I caught the family's image of itself every time it threatened to crack. And every time I caught, I taught them that catching was free. My grandmother saw that before I did. She wrote it in her letter. You spent your life feeding people who do not feed you back. The kindness I thought I was offering was actually the fuel they were burning to stay reckless. There is nothing strong about being used. There is nothing wise about confusing exhaustion with love. And there is nothing moral about protecting people from consequences they have earned in full, on camera, in front of 460 witnesses. What I had to build, harder than the Vineyard, was the nerve to stop catching. 9 days in San Sebastian, while my brother destroyed a wall I had built with my own hands. 11 days of not answering the phone while my mother cried into voicemail. That took something I didn't have at 26 and barely had at 31. Call it backbone. Call it spine. Call it whatever you want. It isn't cruelty. It's the muscle you only grow by deciding finally that your own life is worth the discomfort of someone else's disappointment. If you were the responsible one in your family right now, the one with the steady paycheck, the one everyone calls when the lights are about to be turned off, the one who is reading this and recognizing the shape of your own kitchen table, I want you to hear something. You're allowed to build something that is only yours. You're allowed to put a fence around it. You're allowed to let the people who would tear it down tear themselves down on the way in. That isn't revenge. That's gravity. You don't owe anyone the version of you that bleeds quietly so they don't have to grow up. The kindest thing I ever did for my brother, in the end, was let him meet the man he had decided to be. And the kindest thing you can do for yourself is the same. Pour yourself a glass. The night is quiet. The rows are yours.